Okay, I'm talking again. We're testing this out to make sure you got the sound level. This is the hanging mic, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you are getting it. I am still talking here. And we can get going at any time on this talk.
Talking on the second mic. All right. Are we?
Testing the black mic, testing.
I'm going to have to say this. I don't know whether it's going to work with me here or not. The way my hearing is, I'm having trouble hearing clearly and distinctly.
Okay, can we swing around a stage monitor?
That's why I got my hearing aid in.
I haven't bought any yet.
You want this one turned around here?
That's not even plugged in there.
Oh, okay.
It can't be. I don't think it's going to work with me here. Just due to the sound.
Totally.
You want to be out in the audience, that's what you're saying?
I'd be better, I think, better off out there.
So maybe
If I
Lincoln,
can-
or do you want to be in front here?
What do we want you?
I want my wife to know where I'm at.
We're voting.
I can't hear what he's saying.
Yeah,
We need
okay.
you, Lincoln. We can't have just.
Thinking he can't hear what's going on. We need you
I
up here.
vote that everybody come up here.
Donna would like to be up here.
Oh, she would be good.
Sure.
I think we should have. No, you go.
I was
We're gonna
19
do
when
it
I
straight.
went in adult Sabbath school.
I think we're going to
We
do
can
this.
convince Lincoln to come up.
It would be great.
All right.
This is where we need Flint off.
Lincoln, he may need his cart. Let's come down.
You coming up?
Yeah, I'm okay. Somebody give me a hand. I'll
Here.
go down the stairs without a rail. Thank you. I'm sorry, but the sound is just not right. I don't need to sit in that. Can I sit? Do I have to sit in this?
No.
Wherever you want to sit.
Sorry.
We had heard from Norwalk Church.
What is this? It's just making it a little more intimate rather than
Oh, this is the red thing?
church and one person standing up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So on video, it looks just a little more.
Oh, yeah, oh, there.
You just have to look attentive.
Oh, look attentive. Okay,
Yes.
I can do that.
Yeah, we're not supposed to take a nap.
Not up here.
That's better, that's good.
I think we're gonna get more out of it being his close too, anyway.
Right.
Yeah. And I don't put my feet on this one, right?
Can we get some seats for
I can help it. I can help it. The reason
Buhors too?
I just touched it now.
Oh. Should we put a couple seats back here?
Kind of want this
Yeah, we got some more people showing up.
2:30, so
Yeah.
Are those chairs going to be in the screen, on screen?
Rebecca, are those chairs going to be in the way at all over there?
I'll just move.
I can move back in.
The graduation dinner.
Remember when the workroom sensor wouldn't work the other day?
Yeah.
All I had to do was hit it. And it worked. It's the old electronics for you.
But the problem Mark used to say, well, my dad always used to say, like, I said, drop it once, and that doesn't fix it, he said, toss it out.
So, are we going to do a little introduction here? So welcome everyone to an afternoon learning about Sabbath School. We have with us here Dr. James Zackrison, who is a former director for Sabbath School and Personal Ministries for the General Conference. He's going to be speaking first about designing and organizing a dynamic Sabbath school. And then our second presentation later this afternoon will be about putting together an outreach program for Sabbath school. These will be approximately an hour or so for each presentation. We'll have a 15-minute break between. There will be opportunities for questions, and we can have a roving mic for that purpose as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Zackrison for our presentation this afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Zackrison.
So what we're going to look at now is on designing and organizing a dynamic Sabbath school. There's many ways to do this, and we'll take a look at some of the ways you can do it. This is just a little review of the mission statement, so we see why this is important. So the mission statement is that Sabbath school is local church, religious education that builds faith and practice. The faith part is knowledge, the practice is the application of how you use that biblical knowledge. And it comes in 4 different purposes: study of the word, fellowship, community outreach, and world mission emphasis. And the basic point of all of this is that however you organize Sabbath school, it needs to somehow or other integrate those 4 elements into the overall Sabbath school program. So let's take a look at this now. The issues that arise in Sabbath school are usually these. First of all, you have an attendance. There is an attendance problem in many churches. All kinds of research has been done on the North American division, and Sabbath school attendance usually appears at the top of the list as one of the issues. A second one is societal issues. We'll take a look at that as we go along. How it's organized makes a big difference. One of the key words that has come in on the research that's been done on Sabbath school in North America, the key word is boring. And over that word comes up. Sabbath school is just plain boring, so we don't go. And pastoral support. You have strong pastoral support here. There are many churches where the pastor either ignores or has no interest whatsoever in Sabbath school. And that, of course, is a problem for any leadership team in Sabbath school who's trying to put something together. You're fortunate here because you have strong pastoral support for Sabbath school. Now, there are a number of categories of people who show up in Sabbath school. These are the general categories. First of all, you have new converts. New converts are happy to be there, and they're happy to get anything in their hands they can get their hands on, because it's all new to them, and they're always happy about it, and they'll fit into almost anything that goes on in Sabbath school. You also have some people that we've called discipled Adventists. These are people who have gone to Sabbath school all their lives, and they wouldn't miss it. Going to church includes going to Sabbath school automatically. And so they will go then because they're just discipled to do that very thing. Like the gentleman I told you about in the sermon this morning, who was trying to evangelize me about Sabbath school when I went and sat beside him. Then you have generational Adventists. These are people who may have been Adventists, they've been born in Adventist homes and so forth. And when they start to study their lessons, their comment is, what, again? And they say, we did that in school already, we did that at home, we did that everywhere. Why do we have to study this again? Okay? And finally, there are Adventist audiences around Adventist institutions, hospitals, universities, and so forth. And they will almost inevitably say, these lessons are too simple. And that's because they have all the resources in the world. They can amplify what they have any way that they want to. The new converts and discipled Adventists will often say these lessons are too complicated. Okay? And so it all depends on the audience that you have. But these are the 4 audiences that we have discovered that attend Sabbath school around the world. So let's look a little bit more what we have. In NAD churches, North American Division churches, most church buildings in North America are in rural areas and have membership of less than 100. Okay? Now, notice carefully, that's buildings. But when you count the membership of the Adventist church, nearly 80% are members of urban churches, what some people have called urban cathedrals. So the church buildings are in rural areas, but excuse me, it's what happens when you eat. But the church members are in urban areas. Now you have a kind of a combination right here because you're part urban and part rural, so, in this. Okay, and many churches in urban areas, and we won't spend too much time on them because that's really not your situation here. Many urban churches, the people who attend those churches do not live anywhere near where the church is. They commute in on Sabbath morning. At one time they lived there, but they've long ago moved out to the suburbs. So people will commute into their church, which means that almost everything they do is on Sabbath, and the rest of the time the church is just closed. Because the people are somewhere else. They don't live in that community. So that's a key factor that in general Sabbath schools face across North America. And what happens is that churches along coastal areas, West Coast, East Coast, the Gulf Coast, as far as the United States is concerned, that's where you find the largest number of commuter churches. In the center of the country, in mid-America, or on the coast like we are here at this particular point, away from the major cities, that's where you'll find some centers of Adventism, but you find the smaller churches in those areas. That's just the nature of the church in the North American division. Okay, now, some of the primary problems that are always presented are these. The first one is people say, I go to Sabbath school and all I get is a talking head discourse. Somebody gets up, reads something, talks about something, basically says nothing, and guess what happens to your congregation? Okay? That problem pops up all the time. And they say that's what makes Sabbath school boring. Okay, the second one that comes out on all these surveys that have been done is that too often teachers preach instead of teach. Okay, and so there isn't any discussion going on in the class, and guess what happens to the people who are sitting in the class? Okay, now, notice what Ellen White had to say here. It is not the best plan for teachers to do all the talking.
Amen.
But they should draw out the class to tell what they know. Then let the teacher, with a few brief pointed remarks or illustrations, impress the lesson upon their minds. Okay, now that's one of the core statements we have from the writings of Ellen White about teaching in Sabbath school. Now, the next problem that comes up consistently is routine programming. It's the same thing every week. There's nothing dynamic, and it's boring. Okay, that's where that word comes from. So routine programming, however it is what's happening. We'll look at this in a little more detail just now. Now, as far as the organizational guidelines are concerned, you have a Sabbath school handbook. That Sabbath school handbook has everything in it. Okay, and that's a key that you can use to find almost everything we're saying here is in that Sabbath school handbook. What you see in that picture is the North American Division edition. Each division has their own because they'll have some modifications of how they run it. Okay, now let's go on a little bit more here. Now, here's a key principle. Sabbath school can be organized in lots of ways. Okay? And there's no standard way of organizing Sabbath school. It all depends upon your environment and what's the best way to do it. So key number one, as you see there, is always organize Sabbath school as a learning, fellowship, informal activity. And number two, always include in the overall organization the four purposes of Sabbath school. However you do it, however you organize it, those are two major keys of how to do it. All right, now, here's the two primary words in Sabbath school: participation and informal. Okay, because Sabbath school, as we'll see in a minute, well, one of the easiest ways to do this and to include those four purposes is to have a leadership team. You can have a general superintendent or whatever name, chairperson, whatever name you give to them, as the overall in charge of adult Sabbath school, okay? Just like you have Bob here. Okay, and then an ideal way, this is an ideal, you can't always do it, but this is the ideal, is that you have an associate who is assigned each of those four purposes. So you have one for study, one for fellowship, one for outreach, who could well be also the personal ministries director of the church. And that way, personal ministries and Sabbath school are integrated when it comes to outreach. And finally, somebody for world mission. So we'll show some ways to do that. One thing that really works, and we've done this in the past in some churches where I've pastored, is you have an annual planning session. It takes about 4 hours, and it happens once a year. You can go to a restaurant on Sunday morning, or you can sit down around a desk or whatever, okay? And you lay out a yearly plan. Now, the planning principle is you plan for the year tentatively, and you plan for the quarter permanently. Because always some changes come up. You never know what's going to happen. Somebody's sister-in-law dies, or somebody's cat has 17 kids. Anything can happen. Okay. So what you do, you take the year, the months of the year across the top, and you take those four purposes and you fill in a chart. What are we going to do this month? What are we going to do? Are we going to have 2 or 3 months where we'll have a teacher training? Are we going to do whatever it is? You can lay out your tentative Sabbath school plan for the year. That way you know where you're going. Okay? And this is pretty well standard organizational practice in businesses and you name it. Okay, now then, here's a key factor. Sabbath school is not a mini church service.
Amen.
Okay? Many of them are designed, as we'll see in a minute, as a mini church service, but that is not the purpose of Sabbath school. It's a learning activity. It's not a mini service in the teaching, and that learning experience means that people need to participate. So Sabbath school is not designed, and it was never thought of as being a mini church service. Okay, here's another principle that comes again from Ellen White. Superintendents and the workers of our Sabbath schools have a very important broad field to cultivate. They need to be baptized with the Holy Spirit of God, and their minds may be impressed to do what? Use what?
The very best methods.
The very best methods, and
Follow the
follow the best plans to make them work wholly successful. So this is serious business. Sabbath school is not a Mickey Mouse operation that you put together at the door of the church on Sabbath morning. This is serious business. And a well-run Sabbath school will have this kind of planning going on, and it will have built itself so that they know what's happening. Okay? I told a story here, I think it was last night. When you get to a certain age, you don't remember when you told stories. I walked into a Sabbath school, and they said, Pastor, our Sabbath school is very different. I said, why? What's going on? Well, they said, we couldn't find anybody except one lady willing to serve for the whole year as a Sabbath school superintendent. So I said, what do you do? Well, they said, what we have done is that one lady is our general superintendent. And we organized 4 Sabbath school teams, and each one serves for a quarter. And when a quarter is over, the next team kicks in. And they're willing to serve for 3 months, but not for the whole year. Okay, well, we could give you a whole seminar on how to motivate volunteers. That's just part of what happens with volunteers. So anyway, I said, is it working? They said, you wouldn't believe. These teams, every time they kick in, man, they put so much work into this. Our Sabbath school attendance has tripled. Everybody is working hard, and it's really working well. Well, praise the Lord. Keep it up. Okay, what they did, they adapted to their environment, and they put together a dynamic Sabbath school. So you can put it together however it works. There's some more that we need to look at here. Now, let not those who have a big mechanical way of doing things take complete charge. That's what we talked about in the sermon this morning that G.H. Bell did. And because it was so mechanical, Ellen White wrote him this: we need a great deal more spiritual knowledge along with our rules and regulations. Okay. Now, let's look a little bit more. So, when should Sabbath school meet? Well, you can meet before the worship service. You can meet after the worship service. Some Sabbath schools I know of meet Sabbath afternoon because people are in these commuter churches and they don't even get there till about noon to the church, okay? You can meet in small groups in various times. We usually call that a branch Sabbath school. Whatever works the best. Well, we'll look at some models here as we go along on it. So the point is you can put together a Sabbath school and have it meet whenever it's most convenient. The Sabbath school I'm a part of, we meet on Sabbath morning starting at 9:45. And the reason is because we have 2 services. Not 9:40, 10:45. Our first service is at 9:30, and the next service is at 12 o'clock, and our Sabbath school is sandwiched in between the 2 services. Because our church is growing so fast, we had to have 2 services. Okay? So we used to meet earlier and we had more time, but we got cut back because of the 2 services, and that's when we decided to meet. So there are a number of different Sabbath school organizations. And you take a look at this, and here's a few. Traditional. Okay? The traditional Sabbath school looks sort of like this: song service, welcome hymn, scripture and prayer, a discourse by the superintendent or maybe a program, special music, a mission story. Will all the teachers stand, and we're going to have prayer before we divide for lesson study, and then we have a hymn and a final prayer. Look familiar? Okay, that's what happens in dozens of churches. And that's the very organizational plan that people say is boring. And the reason is that it's a mini church service. Okay, there's almost no participation. Song service, how many people participate? Well, a few people that happen to show up. Okay, and the song leader says, everybody sing. And both people sitting there try to sing. Okay, a welcome. How many people are participating? One, the person up front. You know, and they may give a welcome that goes on and on and on. A hymn, well, whoever happened to show up might sing. Scripture and prayer, how many people are participating? One, the person who's doing it. Discourse by the superintendent, how many people are? One. Okay, special music, how many people are participating? One or two. Okay, a mission story, how many people are participating? One. Lesson study. Well, if the teacher only preaches, it's one all over again. You see what's happening here? We don't have any participation or very little participation in this traditional one. So let's look a little bit more. That's a primary problem with routine programming. Now, here's the major weaknesses. Lack of participation, introductory remarks, a talking head. Some people get up, they do not realize at all what they are doing. These are good, solid, honest people who are just trying to do it right, but they may read something from Ellen White, they may read something from the Bible, they may recite a poem. We have one of our ladies who loves to talk and write poems, and she loves to tell experiences about one of her relatives who all of us know has a screw loose. And always telling stories about this person or what's happening to him and so forth. Sabbath school program, we'll talk about how to solve that a little later. Sabbath school program often not well planned. You know, so often you hear somebody's at the door, the superintendent stands at the door, and somebody walks in and says, you know what, Sister so-and-so was supposed to have the mission reading, but she fell down and broke her big toe, and so we need somebody to take her place, and they shove a mission quarterly in their hands, and the poor person gets up there and tries to tell a story they've never seen before in their life. Okay. And the mission story, again, is a talking head and often not done very well. Okay. These are just some of the weaknesses that appear when you do that. Ellen White had the same experience. They make long, dry speeches in Sabbath school and the teachers' meeting, wearying the minds of both teachers and students. They do not realize that by their long, tedious talks, they are killing the interest in and love for the school. Okay, now I know that you don't do that here, but this happens in a lot of Sabbath schools. So we need to take a look at it. Okay, so when people go to a traditional Sabbath school, they come in to the church, they kind of wander around a little bit, talk some people out in the foyer, get together with their friends, and eventually kind of wander into Sabbath school. Okay, and then finally somebody says, now it's time for class, and so there's brother A's class over there, and sister B has a class there, and if you don't like those, there's that class over there. And somebody who came in late kind of wanders around a little bit out in the hallway and finally wanders into that class over there. They're not sure where they are. My son called me up one day and said, Dad, I'm organizing a new Sabbath school class in our class. I need some advice. I said, what kind of class is it? He says, it's a hall walkers class. I said, a what? What is a hall walkers class? Well, he said, there's a lot of people during Sabbath school who walk the halls. And so I'm trying to get them all together and get a class together, and we're going to name it the hall walkers class. Cool idea. I don't know what his success was. Okay. So people just kind of wander around, finally wander into Sabbath school and sit down someplace. Okay, now, the next best step is to forget that and move to what is called total hour learning. Okay? That is what is called structured informality. That's a fancy name for meaning that the whole thing is informal, but the people who put it together know that it's well planned. The structure isn't seen, it's automatically there. Okay? But the environment is informal. Now, here's what happens. Bible study, the class period is sacred. That should never be cut. 40, 45, 50 minutes, whatever you can spare to put in there, that should never be cut. Nothing should interfere with that time. But the rest of the time that you have for Sabbath school, you can do a lot of different things, and those triangles there, they can become bigger or smaller according to the activity that you want to have during that time. Now, some Sabbath schools still use a system where they have what is called a Sabbath school program. And the program may be a skit, it might be a presentation, it might be all kinds of things. Sort of like what you had this morning when we learned about that experience with the finances and so forth. Okay, so you work out how you're going to spend. Total hour there means whatever time you have available for Sabbath school. The ideal is always an hour and a half. A lot of places do not have an hour and a half. We got cut down to about an hour and 10 minutes in our Sabbath school, and I'll tell you what we did about it a little bit ago. Okay, but whatever is done, the key word is, guess what? Participation. Okay, they get people involved and get people talking and presenting some ideas or something, but getting participation. Okay, now, here's the way to do it. Okay, number one, decide on your time frame. Sabbath school doesn't have to start at 9 or 9:30. That all depends on your environment. Like I said, our Sabbath school starts at 10:45, sometimes a little earlier, depending on how long the pastor preaches. But that's when we have to start because we don't have any other choice in our church program. Okay, so you fit the time frame in to whatever works in your environment. How are we doing here so far? This making any sense? All right, now let's move on a little bit. Here's a time distribution possibility, see? First 10 to 15 minutes might be fellowship, announcements, little introduction, and a prayer, and then you might have 35 minutes for some kind of a learning activity, whatever it might be, that's necessary in the church, and then 40 to 45 minutes for lesson study. Or you can turn it on its head. Here you have lesson study first, and then you have your thing. It all depends. Okay, and what works best in your particular environment. The whole point here is to get away from routine and make it informal, but at the same time you know exactly how it's going to work. Okay, any questions up to this point? So we're going to move on to something else now. Yes.
Are you talking about each individual class having these different components? Or are you
Okay.
talking about the study?
Yeah,
with the
right now
class?
we're talking about the full Sabbath school. We'll get to individual classes in a minute.
Okay.
Okay, because that's an excellent question. It all depends how you can structure it the best. Okay, many Sabbath schools will, everybody will come into a general Sabbath school, and something will happen for a set period of time, and then they will go to classes. Okay, other places like you have here, they go first to the classes and then come into a general Sabbath school for a little while. Okay, it all depends what works the best. Some Sabbath schools have what is called a program. In Sabbath School Toolbox, we always publish 5 ideas for programs, okay? They're just ideas. And we call them quick starts, so people can get some general idea. There's mission stories in there, or stories about early Adventist pioneers, and with those early Adventist pioneers, you can make that into a program. Because sometimes it's really interesting. That's what we're talking about with a program. Not every church has that. It all depends, again. Some of these urban churches where people drive in, they don't get there until 10 or 10:30. But then they'll stay on until the afternoon. Okay, so they might govern everything different. Okay, let's go on a little bit. There are some churches who only have a class. Well, you only have a Sabbath school class, unless it's organized right, you miss out on 3 parts of what Sabbath school is all about. Okay, we'll look at that a little bit more in a minute. Okay, I'm trying to get this to work. Here we go. So, structured informality means you use small groups during the program because then you have participation. Okay? You can use intercessory prayer. There have been a couple times in the Sabbath school I attend where somebody brought up an issue that was really serious. Somebody in the hospital or something else happened, and we just stopped everything and had a session of intercessory prayer. And that was Sabbath school for that day till we went to our class study, because it was just important. You might have some visual presentation or study some situation or something that you might have a short training course that you're giving in that Sabbath school time before you go to classes. You might use some drama or memorization or some dynamic mission story. All kinds of things can be done. Okay, I'll tell you some stories here in a little bit. For instance, I went as a pastor of a church one time. The church had about 300 members, and they had a big church fight, and there was only about 75 left. So they sent me over there to try to put it together again. Okay, I didn't know anything about putting churches back together again, but you learn as you go. So somebody said when we were sitting down making some plan, they said, you know, our Sabbath school is really a disaster. Hardly anybody comes to Sabbath school. So we said, well, what can we do about it? And we were just brainstorming. And somebody sitting there in the group said, you know what? We don't know much about Adventist history in this church, and we'd like to know more about it. So we said, okay, why don't we do this? Once a month, we'll have a Sabbath school program before the classes dedicated to tell us stories about Adventist history.
Amen.
Okay, and you know, we got some people to come in, I told stories, we did all kinds of things. And somebody said, you know what? There's a lot of people in this church, and one reason we had this big church fight, we don't even know the members of this congregation. Well, we had a retired pastor in the congregation. He was really good at interviewing people. So we said, what if one Sabbath a month we interview some family in the church? So he said, okay, that's going to be my ministry. And he went and found these families, and he went to their home and visited them. And of course, they got a pastoral visit at the same time. That was nice. And he went there and visited them and set up the whole interview. And he would bring the whole Sabbath, the whole family up, one Sabbath out of the month. He would bring the whole family up there, and they would be interviewed. I couldn't believe the stories. There was one guy, he'd been sitting there for probably 15 years in that congregation. They interviewed him and his family. The man had escaped over the Berlin Wall from East Germany to West Germany, got shot at the whole way, made it over the wall. Incredible. There he was, sitting there all that time, and nobody knew that. You know, and people were just astounded. at the stories that families had that were in the church on it. And so we had that. And then somebody says, we don't have enough fellowship here. What can we do? And somebody said, why don't we meet once a month in the fellowship hall, and we'll have some donuts and orange juice or something, and we'll just sit there and talk. None of these ideas came from me. It was the people sitting right there with these ideas. So we did that. Man, the fellowship hall filled up, and the orange juice went away, and the donuts ran out. And people were just sitting there talking and having a great, we couldn't stop them. One guy came up and said, Pastor, that's not right. I said, why not? He said, it's not right to eat breakfast in church. I told him, well, I noticed that you don't miss too many potlucks after church. Well, he said, that's different. You can read after, but not first, not before church. I said, well, I got a suggestion for you. Don't come. Stay home. Well, I noticed it wasn't long before he was there with his donut and orange juice. But finally, it turned out that on that Sabbath, we had to move the study time into the fellowship hall because we could hardly get people to stop talking. They were having such a great time. And you know, just with these simple little things, within about 3 months, we had 80% of our church membership attending Sabbath school. Only because it was interesting and people were participating. See? And from then on, nobody would miss Sabbath school. And some other churches heard about it and invited our leadership team to their churches to tell them what we were doing. We said we did all this by accident, but it worked. Okay? So you can sit down and brainstorm and come up with all kinds of ideas that really help the Sabbath school to build. Okay. If we took the time right now and just sat down for about 15 minutes, I bet you would come up with a whole bunch of ideas of what you could do to get people going and people working. So that'd be a good idea. Any questions?
This is before the lesson study, correct?
All of this is before the lesson study. You never cut the time for lesson study. Okay? Because that's a key part of Sabbath school. So all of this was at a different time, and we only have one church service, and so we could put in Sabbath school and use all the time we wanted in this particular case. But anyway, here's some other ways you can do it. You might have in the total hour learning, you might say each month we're going to do something special. This is what one group did when I got to take my glasses off so I can see it. I remember HMS Richards told us one time, said, you know, you guys can all read twice as fast as I do, because I only got one eye. Well, none of us read the way Elder Richard did. When you get glaucoma like I have, sometimes you can't see out of one eye. Anyway, you can have a step ahead month, learning something new. So we're going to spend all this month in Sabbath school learning something new. Okay, you can use your 15-minute program to learn something new, whatever it might be. It could be a hymn, it could be a story, it could be any kind of thing. February might be youth month, so you have the young people up there running Sabbath school for a little while. You might have, like it says here, Know Your Church month, Adventist Heritage. You could have a Sabbath school picnic in July when the weather's nice. I guess it's nice here. I was up here in the Army, and one time it rained 38 days straight. It took about 2 months for us to dry out after that one. Okay. You could do something else, a rally day. Sabbath school rallies are a really good way to do outreach, because you can advertise a Sabbath school rally day. People can invite their friends, can invite their neighbors, and you come in and you have some kind of special presentations. It's a fellowship time, and at the same time, then people are getting acquainted with the Adventist church. You can even advertise it in the local newspaper or whatever. We've had Sabbath school rally days when we specially honored the police department and the fire department, and we brought them in and said, you guys really serve the community, and our church wants to honor you. So we're going to have this rally day. You guys come in, and we're going to tell everybody who you are and give you some kind of a certificate or something. Okay, so that's another thing you can do. Okay, so you can come up with all kinds of stuff. And then you have somebody in the plan that you have. A teacher installation service. Maybe you have new teachers and you're going to install them. Or you have the same ones, but it's a new year. Okay, so you get Herman Bingdoodle there to be responsible for running the program that Sabbath. Or maybe you're going to have Mission Spotlight that you show periodically. And so Mrs. Mission Trip, who is your superintendent in charge of World Mission, she's in charge that Sabbath to show that. Maybe you have some special music program you want to put together periodically. Okay, so you get the Saw Blade Quartet up there to sing or play or whatever it might be. Okay, so then you get somebody responsible, and the people involved here are participating in Sabbath school. They might not have been there for a long time. See, and all of a sudden they're involved. Anything you can do to get people involved. And this makes Sabbath school interesting because people like to see these kinds of things.
Amen.
Okay, so in total hour, you may name, as we already said, a superintendent in charge of each one of these four purposes. Okay, so you have Mr. Evangeliving there in charge of the evangelism and outreach, and that person can also be the master of ceremonies one Sabbath a month. Okay, and you might have Mr. Mission Trip this time, who's involved in World Mission, and Howdy Doody, who's in charge of fellowship, and Brother Teach It Right, who is in charge of the teachers, and so forth. So, but at the same time, they can take their turn as being the master of ceremonies. Okay, so everything is divided up, and this is what you would call your leadership team. On it. Okay, it's amazing what you can do in Sabbath school, isn't it? Yeah. You can just come up with all kinds of stuff that works on it. Now, one of the key factors in organizing Sabbath school classes is to have the Sabbath school class choose a name. When the class chooses a name for itself, what happens is it automatically builds a sense of ownership into the class that wasn't there before because now they have a name. And it's a very simple thing. You just sit down with the class and say, guess what? We're going to choose a name. You'll be amazed at names people come up with. Here's a few: modern Elijahs, ambassadors. These are ones I found around. Joint heirs, Galilean, remnant fellowship. I was teaching a class at a university in Latin America one summer, and there was one group of people there, students, who always arrived late. And they formed, we had the class divided into groups because we were doing a project. So they formed a group, and of course they called themselves the Remnant because they were always late. Okay. So New Life, Loyal Men, people come up with all kinds of names, but from then on their class has an identity. And it gives us it a sense of ownership that builds fellowship into the class. And people don't say, I belong to that class over there. No, I belong to the ambassadors.
So this
Okay.
is the study hour that names their class?
Yeah, well, your class, your Sabbath school classes will choose
Okay.
their name.
Okay, that clarifies it. I wasn't sure.
Exactly,
So it's
yeah.
the study hour classes that
Exactly.
choose a name?
These are the study hour classes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, some places they all meet in the sanctuary. You're fortunate because you got all kinds of rooms where they can meet, and you have the tables you can meet around and so forth. That's really cool. But by giving it a name, it builds a different life into that class.
Good idea.
Yeah. So that's one thing you do. And your Sabbath school will jump to life all of a sudden just by choosing names. It's surprising what it does to it. Okay. Yes.
It also helps those in the foyer who are the greeters, instead of saying, well, there's a class over in that room at that such and such door, and there's one down, if they have names, you still have to tell them where to go, but you could actually have a little map for visitors,
Yeah.
of the church and the names of the different classes
Yeah.
associated with those rooms.
Exactly. The Sabbath school I belong to is called Destination Sabbath School. I'll explain after a while a little bit of how it works. Somebody gave it that name. I don't know where, but it's a good idea. Okay? Another way that you can organize a Sabbath school class is around what are called action units. The original name was evangelistic units. And this is connected up with evangelism in the class. And Ellen White herself says, the church must realize its obligation to carry the gospel of present truth to every creature.
Amen.
Okay, that's why outreach is part of Sabbath school on it, okay? And as she said, it should be one of the greatest instrumentalities to do it. There's a whole story behind this. Some years ago, Sunday school attendance was dropping in Sunday keeping churches. And somebody came up with the idea of organizing Christian education departments in these churches. Now, to us, Christian education is our day school system, our elementary schools and universities and so forth. But they began organizing Christian education departments in local churches. And they were focused on study, both of the scriptures and the doctrines of that particular religion. Well, the minute that they did that and began to focus almost exclusively on study, their attendance began to fall even more. And you'll notice at the top of a lot of Adventist church bulletins still, it says the church at study. Okay, we copied that. And we copied the idea that the biggest purpose of Sabbath school was to study the lesson. And the minute we did that, attendance began to fall. The minute you put outreach back into Sabbath school, attendance starts going up. And it doesn't have to be very complicated. The next hour we're going to study some ways and means you can actually do that aren't very complicated. By that, we don't mean evangelistic meetings. It's a different thing, you'll see. Okay, so formation of small companies are the basis of Christian effort have been presented to me, Ellen White said, by one who cannot err, and to work not only for the church members, but for unbelievers. A Sabbath school class is a small group, okay? And there is a technology of running a small group. We have training programs now that you can get on the internet, you can download it, you can get it, and you can get it in written form that show how to organize a Sabbath school class as a small group. A small group becomes a family, and a small group becomes a fellowship unit, so that people who enter that group automatically feel the fellowship that is there. And so it automatically becomes a soul-winning unit, both for people who may be hot and cold running Adventists or whoever they are that happen to come to Sabbath school, and also for new members who come in, because it's built into it. Okay, now that's a special technology on how to run a small group, but it's not that difficult. Okay, now, there is a type of evangelism that produces dropouts. Okay? That type is when the only thing transmitted is information. And people are told without anybody listening to them, And the presenter is seen as somebody who's selling a product, even if that product is an idea. Okay? Now, what happens here is that when you use that type of approach, and a lot of statistics have been done on this, 15% say yes, 85% say no. Okay, now, there is a type of evangelism that develops stay-ins. That's where you have dialogue and interaction, small groups, people can ask questions, their approach as a friend, it makes all the difference in the world. It's called friendship evangelism. And when you practice, and if a Sabbath school class learns how to do friendship evangelism, it will do it automatically when people come in. And they will immediately be part of that particular group, and they'll stay in. Because when this happens, here's what the statistics show. 99% say yes. And of that 99%, 96% stay in. What a difference. Just because of the fellowship environment that you have. Okay, so here's a time distribution in this particular type of class. You have 5 minutes where the person called the care coordinator will talk about missing members. We need to pray for this person. Who's going to visit brother so-and-so or sister so-and-so, find out who they are. Sister so-and-so hasn't been here for the last 2 weeks. How are we going to find out where she is? And the key here is, if somebody misses 3 weeks in a row and nobody knows where they are, something's wrong. Okay? And that person then needs a follow-up on it. And in 15 minutes, for some kind of whatever outreach plan the class has, and then the regular time for the lesson study. Okay, now, I belong to an organization called Destination Sabbath School. This is a unique Sabbath school. It all came about because of a need. 2 or 3 of us were sitting listening to a person present a lecture one time, and we all said, you know what, our Sabbath schools are not exactly alive and well. What can we do? So we sat down and started brainstorming, came up with something. 2 of these people taught at a college. Well, the college then, now it's a university. And they said, well, we're going to start a brand new Sabbath school because we got tons of students on Sabbath morning who don't go to Sabbath school. So they published a little brochure and passed it around in the dorms. And they said, guess what? There's going to be a new Sabbath school class starting, but you won't like it. So don't come. Well, guess what?
They all came.
Well, yeah, sure, every student in the place got to see what they don't like. So about 200 showed up that first Sabbath. And somebody named it Destination Sabbath School. And then somebody else attended and picked up the idea, and they brought it with them when they moved to where we are right now, and they established it in the church that I happen to be a member of. And one of those members from where it first started went there to start it. And when I went to the general conference, he came to see me. And he said, I know this is your idea, but I want to tell you what we're doing here. And so we eventually went to that church also and got involved in Destination Sabbath School. Well, here's the way it works. This thing has just grown and grown and grown. The person who is the master of ceremonies or mistress of ceremonies every Sabbath is called a helms person. I don't know where that name came from. Somebody thought it up.
Sounds like a boat.
Yeah, that's a boat thing. So I guess because we're on the East Coast or something, they thought up a boat. But anyway, it became a helms person. That helms person, I have a regular list, and we have a lady who puts all this together. They have 10 minutes. And in those 10 minutes, they can do whatever they want. they can stand on their head and wave their arms, or they can read a poem, or they can read a story, or they can stand up there and just look at us. They can do whatever they want for 10 minutes. We have one guy who's seriously into health programs, and he always gives us a little health talk. And the other lady I mentioned before, she always has some poem or something she's written and tells us about it. Different people do different things. But whatever it is, they got 10 minutes. When 10 minutes are up, the next person gets up, and if they want to keep talking, they got to go off in a corner someplace and talk to themselves. They got 10 minutes, that's it. Okay? Then after the 10 minutes, we go to lesson study. We have a teaching team. And the reason is because we have so many people that travel that are in our Sabbath school that we have a regular teaching team. And we have teachers meeting once a quarter. We go over the lesson so that everybody's singing off the same page, and we put it together. And we have some incredible teachers. They are all homegrown from Destination Sabbath School. We had a young lady she came up to me one day, she said, "You know what? I've been listening here, and I think I could teach a lesson. Can I give it a try?" Absolutely. Well, she became one of our finest teachers. Unfortunately, she moved away, but she was a great teacher while she was there. So all of our teachers are homegrown from Destination Sabbath School, and they just come up, and we had one brother, we call him Brother Hallelujah. He knows the Bible by heart. He literally knows the Bible by heart. Got a photographic memory. But he's always saying hallelujah and praise the Lord and so forth. And he came up to me one time, got a big, deep voice like that. And he said, "Could I try teaching a lesson?" I said, "Sure, let's give it a shot." Well, he did good the first time. The second time, he really bombed. He got off on some favorite topic and didn't study the lesson. And I talked to him in a kind of a gentle, diplomatic way. Some of the members weren't quite as diplomatic when they talked to him. They said, "You're not going to mess up our Sabbath school with all that talk. We want to study the lesson." Well, he went away because he got mad. And pretty soon he showed up one Sabbath. And I said, "Brother Ben, you're back again." "Yeah," he said, "they chased me off." Well, I know who talked to him. He doesn't pull any punches. He let him have it. I said, "Well, look, all we want is for you to stick with the lesson. You know your Bible backward and forward. You know everything there is. You can quote it by memory. So just stick with the lesson." Well, he taught again, and guess what? He did a really good job. So he's back on our list again. Okay? So this teaching team then, every Sabbath, somebody then is the assigned teacher. After that, we have a fellowship time. This goes for about 15 minutes. Sometimes we run over a little bit, and they'll still get into the second service on time. We call this our special fellowship time here. This is called our Almond Joy Ministry. To all the visitors, we ask who's a visitor, and we give out a little miniature Almond Joy candy bar, and it has wrapped around it a Bible study based on the elements in an Almond Joy candy bar. I have one with me, Bob, that I'll give to you before we leave, okay? So you can see what it's like. And we print up this little Bible study. Somebody came up with it, I don't know who. And first of all, any visitors. We always have 3 or 4 or 5 visitors. I don't know where they come from, they just show up. I think the Holy Spirit trusts our Sabbath school and sends them there. Some of them just walk in off the street, and they say, "We saw this church, don't know anything about it. Happened that somebody pointed us to that door, and here we are." You know, but the minute anybody walks into our Sabbath school, our people are organized in a way that they immediately talk to them, they immediately greet them, they immediately help them find a place to sit. They do all of this fellowship thing just automatically. And we have a number of people there to do that. when people come in on Sabbath morning, some of them attend first service, some of them just come in at that time for Sabbath school. When they come in, people are circulating all over. Even the people who come in start circulating and greeting each other. See, that's fellowship. And it just has been built into everybody. That's what you do when you come to Sabbath school. And it makes a huge difference. Because everybody feels at home immediately. Yeah, on it, okay? So, we ask who's the visitors, who's had a birthday, who had an anniversary, who had a baptismal anniversary, whatever it may be. Okay, and then we give them out one of these little Almond Joy Ministry that it's called, and they get that with a little Bible study. We have a literature table in the back of the room where anybody can go and get, it's always full of literature, and it's amazing. People take it to give out and hand out in the businesses where they are and so forth. That table is emptied almost every Sabbath with the literature that's put out there. And the same members contribute the literature. And they bring it in and put it on the table. Okay? And then we have a little time of mission emphasis, which usually is a report about our $10 church project that we have with Maranatha that I talked about this morning. And a closing prayer, and that's it. So then people are supposed to leave, either go home or go to the second service. Do you think we can get them out of there? Everybody's standing around talking and just having a great time. In that fellowship time also, we always have a testimony time. So people can have a testimony, but it always has to be, as we mentioned before, it has to be a testimony from that week. Something that the Lord did. And it is amazing the testimonies we get. And we'll stop right there, and our closing prayer is always about, please, Lord, bless these testimonies we've heard and take care of this situation. You know. Now, our church has a bunch of Sabbath school classes. One meets downstairs in our committee room. It has about 5 members. We have a new member class that also built up, meets in the library, uses that curriculum we talked about. And we have 2 or 3 other smaller classes that meet. One meets in the sanctuary, which is made up of some people who don't want to go anywhere else. And it's a good class, has about 15 members. And then Destination Sabbath School. Destination Sabbath School is a large group run like a small group. Okay? In Destination Sabbath School, we have an average of 100 people attending every Sabbath. It fills the fellowship hall. A couple of weeks ago, we ran out of chairs. We didn't have enough chairs in the whole church for them to sit in on it. And these are people, I told the story, I think last night. You know, this one young man showed up one Sabbath. Nobody had ever seen him before. And he said he discovered the Sabbath by reading the Bible. Amen. And he found our church and came to it. And he said, back home on my island, I was a drug dealer. But somehow or other, the Lord led me to a Bible, and I got to studying it. And he said, it said there you're supposed to go to church on Saturday, so I did. Okay. And when he moved into our area, he immigrated to our area, and he said, I looked for the first church I could find that meets on Sabbath, and I walked in here. Well, we found a way to get him Bible studies. We have a gentleman in our Sabbath school who is the world master at giving Bible studies. He is just totally incredible. So we hooked him up, and he gave him Bible study. He's been baptized. Oh, he's a faithful member there, and his wife now is taking Bible study. It just happens. We have other people there, the same thing. And the Holy Spirit just sends these people to us.
Amen.
You know? And it's very simple. We don't have anything very complicated at all. It's very simple. But the people love it because of the fellowship and because of the teaching. And we really specialize in doing the kind of teaching that helps people learn. We use the regular Bible study guide, but it's amazing what you get out of the Bible study guide. Okay, so that's another way you can do it. So, in essence of what we're saying here, you can organize Sabbath school any way you want, but there are many different ways of doing it. You fit it into your environment, and you start building participation and fellowship and outreach into it beside the Bible study, and you'll be amazed what happens. And you use some of these simple methodologies that don't seem very complicated, but you use something like this, and it just works because people respond to it. It's what people are looking for. So the next hour, after we take a little break here, we're going to look at how you can put some outreach perspectives and outreach methodologies into whatever kind of a Sabbath school you organize, and you'll be amazed what the result is and what kind of people it brings in. So Bob, I'll turn it back over to you for now.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Zackrison.
Any other questions?
Any questions from people in the pews here? So we're going to take a 15-minute break, but before we do that, Dr. Zackrison has come here all the way from Maryland. He's asked for no monetary reimbursement for anything, but we would like to do a love offering for him. I've asked Dave here to help with that, and so we'll just take a minute for that, and then we'll break for about 15 minutes and reconvene. Any questions? Any questions? You do.
I think it would be helpful to have copies of his slideshow.
Is that something that we can get, Dr. Zackrison, your PowerPoint for this? Is that something you can share with us?
Oh, you're welcome to keep them, no problem at all. Download them here and you can use them any way you want to. Sure, absolutely. There's some others added to some of these that we didn't get to. You're welcome to all of these, no problem.
So Bob will have
So yeah, if you share that with me, then anybody who wants that, you
Sure.
can ask me and I'll get a file for it.
Yeah, and I think they're loaded here on your, you can download them for your church computer. Yeah.
The other thing I'm trying to kind of pull together, it looks like there's two kinds of arrangements of Sabbath school. You can have some of the time being a full church group together, and then they go to their lessons, their lesson studies, which is pretty traditional. But then it sounds like Destination Sabbath School is a room where everything happens. In other words, it's not the full church having Sabbath school in the same place. So you have
again, it all depends upon your environment and what you can do. Our Sabbath school, the one I've just described here that we have, we're basically a large, small group, if there is such a thing, because we didn't have any place else to meet. And it just grew and grew and grew. But we have organized it like a small group. So those same elements are there. And so the whole Sabbath school, our church doesn't have any general meeting because it has the two services and there's no way to do it. And so our Sabbath school has a full Sabbath school, but at the same time, it focuses on study. So we really have a full Sabbath school within a church that has a bunch of other small Sabbath school or small classes, but we're a full Sabbath school. And our pastoral staff regularly sends people, say, you don't want to go anywhere except Destination Sabbath School. That's up to them.
So you have the whole time. You have like an hour and 15 minutes.
We have an hour and 15 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have built everything into the hour and 15 minutes. We once had an hour and a half, but then we got chopped on when we went to Sioux service. But yes, we have the full time.
So you can do a lot more when you have more time.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, so we have the full time there, and we can do a few more things. And even then, we had to cut something out because.
And then there was where you were saying one month you would do maybe one Sabbath out of the month, a church would do a program on Adventist history or something like that.
Okay.
That would be in
In
the
that
general
case,
Sabbath school?
yeah, there we had the whole Sabbath school in the sanctuary. We did that part and then divided for classes.
I think that would be really good.
So just-
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we call the Sabbath school programs, and we just happen to organize it that way. Yeah, okay.
So we'll take a 15-minute break, meet back here just a little bit before 4.
Rick Mortis is saying it. Oh, it's so good. I want to come visit.
You wouldn't want to be on camera.
Good information, man. Yeah, you gotta bring some of the key